Madam President, speaking to the amendment.
Senator has the floor.
Madam President, over the last month, I've had a few conversations with our Secretary of Public Safety, not just on this piece of this amendment, but on the overall bill. I've also heard from 5 chiefs of police, 3 sheriffs, 2 JAGs, and multiple individuals from the government contracting industry. Madam President, after I heard from them, I figured I'd try to write this down and get answers. So I wrote up a bunch of scenarios that individuals were talking to me about, my chiefs of police, my sheriffs, my JAGs, a lot of the government contractors who do integration of tools and weapons and things into systems that they further provide to the military. Madam President, I don't know if the body knows it or not, but any weapon in the state of Virginia that's transferred to the military, to the FBI, anytime an ATF agent needs a new gun, any police department, any sheriff, anyone in law enforcement, it has to go through a Virginia local FFL. So with every single weapon that transfers in or out of any federal, state, or local law enforcement activity that operates here in Virginia has to go through a local FFL. So if a police officer is retiring and they send off, and under a different section of code, he can get his gun that he had at a reasonable cost. I believe it's usually set at $1 or $2. And if that gun were to happen to have a magazine above 15 rounds, he's got to send it to Richmond. It comes back and it's got to be transferred through a local FFL. Well, guess what? When he retires as a law enforcement officer, he's now retired, so he's no longer a sworn law enforcement officer. So for the FFL to transfer that to him, it's against the law. Now, he can have it because he's a retired FFL, but an FFL can't transfer it to him. That's one of the scenarios we brought up. There were a few with military, retired military, integrators. Just about every one of us have a government integrator in their district, or some districts you have a couple hundred of them. Well, when you integrate weapons into a system for the government, you're under government contract to do that. You are not a government employee. You are not an agent of the government. You do not fall within our code section here, Chapter 107 at all. You're not a government officer. You're not a government agent. You're not a law enforcement officer. You're not an employee member of the armed forces of the United States. You're not a security personnel at a contracted defense facility as defined in 18.2.121.3, or a person authorized by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So basically, when you transfer it in, you can't do your job, and for the FFL who transfers it to that individual who's integrating it into that weapon system, they cannot do their job anymore. So the Secretary of Public Safety and I have had many conversations about this. We went through about 15 scenarios, and before I got back to any of my 5 chiefs of police, 3 sheriffs, 2 JAGs, and other government contractors who have brought this up to me, I said, hey, I'm going to do the responsible thing, and I'm going to run this through our LIS attorneys to make sure that I'm not missing something. And what our LIS attorneys came back with, hey, I laid out a bunch of these scenarios. A court's analysis would be dependent upon the facts at hand, and the constitutional analysis involving the supremacy clause would also be likely to come to play, but it's got to go through the court systems. Another answer, I'll just give you a summary on it. In summary, much of what we discussed in a lot of these scenarios would be left up to a court's interpretation. I hope that I've provided what I've provided here lends some clarity, but these are complex issues in gray areas not clarified in legislation that would need to be more thoroughly analyzed through litigation, as much of it is rather fact dependent. So imagine me, retired military guy, spent 20 years, 6 months in, very close to my military, my law enforcement, came out of one of the communities that really, in my district, that use this stuff and rely on this to do their job. And I'm not talking about, and I'll get into this other part in a minute, these individuals, when I went back to them, I said, well, it's a little confusing still, and basically the courts are going to have to interpret based on the fact pattern. One of my integrators goes, well, does that mean somebody's got to get in trouble, get arrested, and then there's a court case before we can figure this out? And I said, pretty much. So I know that we generally here try not to write legislation that's conflicting. Oh, wait, let me digress for a minute. Every time I called the Secretary of Public Safety, and he's a great guy, he returned my calls, very responsive. Every single time he'd say, hey, I need to run this by the governor's policy people. I need to run this by the governor's policy people. Last Thursday when I talked to him, I said, hey, have you run this by the governor's policy people? He goes, yes. I said, do you have an answer? He goes, no. So I called Friday morning again, and he goes, hey, I heard the governor's policy person is going to call you on this and have a discussion. So about 1 o'clock, the governor's policy person and I was walking into a meeting. The governor's policy person and I had a conversation. I actually had somebody try to come out, knock on my door, and grab me to explain that, hey, there's 30 people in here waiting for you. You're delaying our meeting. Hello. I'm like, hey, I'm on with one of the governor's policy people, trying to make sure I articulate something to him. He said, hey, you'll see a response to this. You'll see a correction. You'll see something out of us, hopefully in the amendments. Great. In the amendments, we hit one of the issues. We didn't hit a whole lot of the other issues.
Madam President, will the senior senator from Virginia Beach yield for a question?
Madam President, I'll yield when I'm finished. And I'm happy to answer any questions that the gentleman has.
Senator from Virginia Beach may continue.
Madam President, one of the things I find frustrating here, and I hear this from my constituents a lot, and they ask me about the folks who are writing our gun laws. And they say, do they understand guns? And I say, some of them do, some of them don't. They say, well, if they understand guns, if they understand people in our rural communities, do they understand hunting? Do they understand livestock protection? Do they understand that for many families, a firearm is not a political talking point? It's truly a tool. It's a tool to put protein and food on our table. And I said, hey, I've tried to explain that a shotgun that has a choke isn't an assault weapon, and that choke that screws into a shotgun is really to change the pattern of the shot coming out to help affect accuracy, safety, and really focus on the type of game that's being hunted. But it really is, it allows you to take a responsible and ethical shot. I've explained that a few times. And they've come back and said, okay, well then why are they saying every time I screw on a choke that it's now an assault weapon? I said, well, they really don't understand this. Madam President, when I talk to these individuals, they talk about turkey gun with the front thing, and we've had that conversation on here, that front stock on a hand grip on a turkey gun, which allows for safety, security, and allowing a hunter to take an ethical shot. So, Madam President, as we go through this, the individuals are saying things to me, and I've got a lot of farmers now in my new district, and I really like talking to them. They come up with good ideas and unique things that I really haven't heard before. One of them said, hey, you know, do the folks up in Richmond, because they refer to everybody up here as the folks up there and them people, do they realize that when you've got a coyote coming after your livestock and they're running at 35 miles an hour, that it's real difficult to hit them with one shot or two shots, and sometimes you got to pop off a few rounds to stop them. And oh, by the way, our livestock is what we put into the grocery stores for those folks up there in Richmond to feed their families. So got it, I understand. I'll try to make sure I continue to explain that. Madam President, we talk about affordability, and a lot of the folks that I talk to, affordability to them is being able to continue hunting and shooting and putting game on the table for their families so they have protein. Madam President, when folks up here see a pistol grip, a lot of them see an assault weapon. When folks down where I'm from, and a lot of our rural communities see a pistol grip on a shotgun, they understand that's to help with aiming, accuracy, and taking an ethical shot. Madam President, you know, when we talk about guns up here, you have both sides. I try to explain that, hey, the word gun, and immediately I assume a law-abiding citizen who's using a gun as a tool for feeding their family, protecting their livestock, doing the right thing. And Madam President, a lot of folks, when they see that, they hear the term gun and they hear what we're doing here and they say, oh, that's got to be criminal activity. No, we have law-abiding citizens, and they're not the problem. They're the ones who use guns. We have farmers protecting their livestock. They're not the problem. We have the hunters who are feeding their families. Guess what? They're not the problem. We have the grandmother with a shotgun in her house because the sheriff is 30 minutes plus away from responding to her house. And Madam President, whether it's a veteran, a sportsman, a farmer, a single mother, a homeowner, a person living down a long dirt road, these are the people we should not be targeting here. These are the people we should try to understand how they use these tools in their everyday life. They're not criminals. And as a matter of fact, we should be going after criminals with programs like Operation Ceasefire. One that successfully worked across this country, was established under President Obama, helped lower the cost of, lower the amount of shootings in Boston, in Richmond, in Baltimore. Those are the programs we should be looking at. We should be keeping violent offenders off the street, but we don't want to, but today with the legislation we do, we don't want to keep them in jail. We want to forget that for every crime, there's a victim. Guns aren't bad. They're the tools we use to protect. They're the tools we use for self-reliance. They're the tools that many people use and families use to provide food for the table. We're not asking Richmond to teach us how to hunt in rural communities. We're asking Richmond to stop taking away the rights, the tools, and the tradition of people that it does not understand. And when we look at the federal integrators that literally help keep the jobs in Virginia, even in Northern Virginia, we don't want to lose them. We don't want to create it so they can't do their jobs. We don't want them to do what Boeing did, which is take $74 billion out of the Commonwealth and move their 3 top branches of government services to St. Louis out of Virginia. We want to keep our government integrators here. We want to keep our law enforcement folks understanding the clarity of the laws we pass. And we should be passing clear, concise laws, not laws that continually confuse individuals and are going to get law-abiding citizens in trouble. These situations, the scenarios I talked about today, are still up in the air. We still don't have clarity. And as the folks from LIS said, we're going to need the courts to decide and interpret the facts of these before they get anything done. That's wrong. We need to stop this. We need to retract all of them. We need to repeal all of them. This is ridiculous. Thank you. At that point, Madam President, I'm happy to answer any questions from anybody on the floor. Thank you.
The senior senator from Prince William, do you wish to ask a question?
Thank you, Madam President. Although I've got to check the predictions market as to whether or not we're going to adjourn at 2 o'clock or not at this point. With the senior senator from Virginia Beach yield for a question, as I might have lost where it was the gentleman was going.
The senator has yielded already. Senator from Prince William.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd ask the senator, is he for or against the question that's before the body, which is whether or not this law will be implemented this year or next year? So if
Senior Senator from
answer the question.
From Virginia Beach has the floor.
And Madam President, let me explain it this way. There should have been a complete repeal of these bills, not a partial, tiny little fix. It's unconstitutional what we've done here. And the courts are going to have to decide. It's just, I don't think we should take our police, military, our law enforcement, our federal law enforcement, our integrators, I don't think they should have to go to the courts to figure out how to get their jobs done.
Inquiry, Madam President.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. A vote green on this amendment would have the effect as to delay the implementation of the bill that the senator is speaking to. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator.
Madam President, if I may.
Inquiry, Madam President.
Senator has the floor.
And so a red vote on this amendment would mean that the law that the senator is also speaking to would be implemented sooner. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator,
President, if I
Senior
may.
Senator from Virginia Beach.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, this amendment does not solve the problem. This amendment does not allow these people to get their job done. This amendment only focuses on the transportation side of this bill. It has nothing to do with the transfer side of this bill. Madam President, this amendment does not put these people back to work. This amendment puts these people in courts to figure out what we've passed up here and stop them from doing their job. Thank you.